Hello, everyone, and welcome to Freedom Worldwide, presented by Atlas Network. I'm Tom Palmer, Executive Vice President of Atlas Network, and today we're visiting with Latin American regional experts, including Atlas Network partners in Argentina, to ask, can reform succeed in Argentina? We'll explore the implications of the recent election result, what it means for the future of the country. I'm really thrilled to have three experts with us. But before we start, for those of you who are new to Atlas Network, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting local idea entrepreneurs who are advancing freedom in their countries and communities. We support a network of currently 563 independent pro-freedom organizations in 103 countries around the globe, with training, grants, mentorship, and networking opportunities with experienced colleagues from all around the planet. We don't take any government money, and we never will. And that means our work and this program rely on donations from people like you. If you've never invested yet in Atlas Network, consider joining us with a gift of $25 or more, and we'll send a printed copy of our Freedom's Champion magazine to your home, delivered by a uniformed agent of the American government. You'll find the link to subscribe in our chat window today. So let's meet our panelists. But first, I'd like to introduce Candelaria de Elizalde. She's the Coordinator General of the think tank Libertad y Progreso, Liberty and Progress, which is based in Buenos Aires, where she coordinates a team of policy experts, lawyers, economists, researchers, and writers to advance individual liberty in Argentina. And she's a real veteran of the work to secure constitutionally limited government against aggressive populism and statism. Our next guest, Daniel Reisbeck, is a Latin America policy analyst at the Cato Institute. He's from Colombia. He writes on topics economic, political, social, and so on. He's an analyst, a journalist, and he holds a doctorate in history. So he brings a historical lens to this as well. And then finally, Agustin Echebarne is Director General of Libertad y Progreso, where he works with Candelaria and their team on behalf of freedom in their country. He's an economist, was more than 20 years a university professor of economics, and now a businessman and the Director General of Libertad y Progreso. Now, before turning to our expert guests, I want to kick things off with some remarks delivered by Argentine President Javier Milei at the recent World Economic Forum in Davos. They are translated and dubbed by AI, which is pretty awesome by itself, but they're also an accurate translation of the remarks he delivered in Spanish. President Milei.
We are here today to extend an invitation to the other Western countries to resume the path towards prosperity. Economic freedom, limited government, and unrestricted respect for private property are vital for economic growth. The impoverishment that collectivism produces is not a fantasy, nor is it fatalism. It is a reality that Argentinians have known very well for at least 100 years. Since we decided to abandon the model of freedom that had made us rich, we are trapped in a downward spiral where we are getting poorer every day. The Argentine case is the empirical proof that regardless of wealth, natural resources, population capability, education level, or the amount of gold bars in the central bank's coffers, these factors do not guarantee success. If measures are adopted that hinder the free functioning of markets, free competition, free price systems, if trade is hindered, if private property is attacked, the only possible destination is poverty.
It's a quite clear clarion call for economic freedom in a country that has been swirling around the drain for a number of years. I'd like to start out with a description. Maybe I'll turn to you, Augustin. Where is Argentina right now? What is the current situation with inflation, runaway spending, and so on?
Thank you, Tom, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to me to speak to you all in this webinar. Well, Argentina is in a dire straits, really, because we got the first thing that we have to mention is that President Milei inherited a country with a terrible economic landscape, with an annual inflation of 211%. But this was despite an undervalued exchange rate with currency controls, delayed utility rates, many prices either frozen or cooled, and the average inflation was 211%. Then we have the central bank that was completely in ruins, with negative reserves of about $12 billion and remunerated liabilities, which is something unusual in any central bank, but it was almost 3 times the monetary base, and it was paying like 300% annual interest rate. Then the treasury was near bankruptcy, with debt close to 100% of GDP and the bonds trading at 25 cents per dollar. Of course, now they are trading at 47, so we are improving, but still it was very difficult. Also, we have an immense and inefficient state. We doubled the government expenditures in the last 20 years, but public services are very poor. Education was the first in Latin America, but fell from the top position to below the middle of the pack. And Latin America as a whole, if you compare to the world, we are not very good. So we are that's something very awful. And I would close this first initial statement with the mention of poverty. Argentina had like 4% of poverty, like 40 years ago, and now we are at about 45% of poverty. And if you mention poverty on the youth, it's probably more than 2/3 of the youth are below the poverty line. So really, the challenges that President Milei received are immense.
So this is a country that's really in a very dire situation and doesn't show a lot of hope, especially for young people. What are the main pillars that need to be addressed by anyone? But President Milei has shown the willingness to take them on. So Daniel, why don't you outline some of the key challenges that he faces? Over to you, Daniel.
Oh, sorry about that. Well, I would say that the root cause of Argentina's problems now is fiscal profligacy, so chronic overspending, and especially the way in which past governments were monetizing those deficits, monetizing the debt. Of course, Argentina is a serial defaulter. And in that sense, of course, it's urgent to bring spending under control. In that sense, say it was very good news that they announced the first budget surplus in many years in Argentina in the first month of Milei's government. But I would say, and the government's strategy is to have this zero deficit policy, and let me just preface what I will say by saying that, of course, I support categorically all measures to cut bureaucracy, rein in spending, and to balance the budgets. However, sometimes the way that you achieve the surplus is as important as the surplus itself, or the way you balance the budget is as important as the balanced budget itself. And the strategy that the government has had is basically to dilute the debt and the deficit by having practically negative interest rates. So inflation is still running very high, and official interest rates are far below inflation. And you might say this is a good thing in terms of the government debt. But the problem that I see is that you are diluting everyone else's savers, and a big part of that surplus is due to the dilution of pensions. So pensions are paying far below inflation instead of being kept up with inflation. And you might argue that a pay-as-you-go pension system is fundamentally unsound. But as I say, the problem is that you dilute the pensions and you dilute the government debt, but you dilute savers and you dilute purchasing power. And that is why I have advocated also with my colleague, Gabriela Calderon here at Cato. We've written several articles in the past year or so advocating for immediate dollarization in Argentina. And actually, Milei won the presidency promising dollarization and getting rid of the central bank. And at this point, we haven't seen a clear plan to dollarize, just a plan to eventually dollarize. And we are a bit concerned about that.
So there's something, Candelaria, I think we'll be addressing. There's a political and a social challenge. On the one hand, trying to cut spending for every person that's spent on, that's their income. And all of the groups who are receiving benefits, special interests, and so on, as well as ordinary people, are going to have objections to that. So there's political objections and social objections. Candelaria, could you address a little bit some of those problems that are being faced in bringing about needed arithmetical reforms, budgetary reforms to the country?
Of course. Thank you for having me, Tom. Let's talk about the political challenge. After so many decades of chronic capitalism and populism, Argentine people got used to live in a country where the government decides who are the winners and who are the losers. And of course, the winners are always the same: governors, congressmen, politicians, unions, and family and friends, of course, the casta. So Milei won the election saying he would end that, and that he would give the power back to the people, to the citizens. And that makes political resistance, of course. Last month, he sent this huge bill, the omnibus bill, that is with a lot of the regulations in it. And his party has only 38 representatives in the Congress, in the deputy chamber, over 57, sorry. And so they try to make some agreements with other parties. Unfortunately, that didn't work. So he has less support than expected. And he withdrew the bill. And on the other hand, you have the governors that don't want to lose their privileges. Every day we find out a different privilege from different governors. You know, it's a mess. And so they won't support any initiative from the national government, and that imbalance of forces are going to be difficult to tackle, you know. And on the other hand, you have, well, Milei, he's a new political force, and he has a small group of collaborators, and that's okay by now, because we are in an emergency stage. But he needs to show which is the team that is going to lead all the structural reforms. We don't have that information yet, not so clear, and that's a challenge. And if we talk about the social challenge, as you mentioned, well, Milei has 63% of popularity right now. People that voted for him, they knew these were going to be hard times, because Milei said that we don't have money, he said. So they voted for him anyway. But now they are suffering all this, and they need to see that some changes are coming. They need to see improvement, outcomes, you know, positive outcomes. And if this salary is going down and pensions going down continue, it may be a fuel to protest, strikes, or even increase violence down the street. So if Milei's government wants to avoid this, they have to end with inflation, of course. They have to end with insecurity, and they need to show and to make this economic plan, these reforms, as fast as possible. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really complicated.
Okay, well, thank you. I'd like to point out that I'm posing questions with our expert panelists, but also those who are tuned in, feel free to use the webinar chat box to pose your own questions. You can find it at the bottom of your screen. Click on it. You can see all the messages up there, and go ahead and post your questions, and we'll be able to address those in the last third of our conversation. So the issue that's come up is a kind of old-fashioned green eye shade question. How do you bring down spending? That's a very difficult problem. The United States Congress hasn't achieved this. Granted, it's not in quite the same situation as Argentina, but it's a problem we face around the world. Argentina has a problem that's especially acute, which is total lack of trust in the monetary authorities. They cannot tie their own hands, if you will, and every attempt in the past has failed. So I want to jump right into this question of dollarization, which is the one that has really gotten, I think, the bulk of the attention as a radical, serious approach to this. Just start out first, what does dollarization mean, if you could explain that?
Tom, may I add something before that? Because I think it's very important to understand that President Milei took strong initial decisions to tackle the deficit. And for instance, of course, it's true what Daniel said, that it's not sustainable, the liquidation of the salaries and the pensions. But the thing is that the first thing he did was to downsize the government from 19 ministries to 8, a third of the secretaries and subsecretaries, and 60,000 public employees. He decreased 60,000 public employees of the federal state, which is nearly 10% of the federal system, and also cut 250,000 improperly granted social plans. The thing is that doing all these things takes time. That's why dollarization is interesting, because dollarization gives you time to put in place all the rest of the structural reforms that, of course, President Milei knows that he has to do it, and he has the plan to do it. And as Candelaria said, this law, this mega law of about 600 articles, have many deregulations and many measures that are very important to attract investments.
Let's then turn to dollarization, because you have Panama, Ecuador, El Salvador, California. All those places have dollarized in the past. Has the outcome been positive? But also, just what does it mean for a country to dollarize? Daniel.
Well, when you dollarize, it's important to know that there are different types of dollarizations, but basically what it means is that you grant the US dollar legal tender, even though it doesn't have to be that explicit. For instance, in Panama, which was born as an independent country in 1903, and it's dollarized since 1904. And the Panamanian constitution has never granted legal tender to a specific currency. So there's basically competition of currencies, and by custom, people use the US dollar, by custom and by preference. So you can have that type of system, or you could just grant outright legal tender to the US dollar. And the advantage of having the US dollar in general terms is that you will have far lower inflation rates than with national currencies, even in countries with responsible and independent central banks. Well, if you look at the lowest inflation rates in Latin America, it's precisely Panama, Ecuador, and El Salvador, the three dollarized countries that have had the lowest inflation rates, because you get rid of the political class's ability to monetize the debt and to manipulate the currency. So that's why it's such an appealing and attractive policy. And in the case of Argentina, which is similar as to when Ecuador dollarized in the year 2000, is that you dollarize in the midst of a crisis, and it's the one proven way to bring down inflation rapidly. As Candelaria was saying, this is urgent in Argentina now, and you not only bring down inflation, but you also bring down interest rates. You create a positive confidence shock in the banking system in terms of you will definitely see an increase in deposits, and you can do all this while strengthening and maintaining people's purchasing power. Whereas Milei's government now, what they're doing is that they are diluting and weakening people's purchasing power, and I think that is a mistake. And they are regarding dollarization as an end point or a destination. I think dollarization is a starting point. It's where you start. And I think it would make all these other reforms far easier. And it's the one reform, because a lot of other reforms, for instance, reforms by decree, for instance, the end of rent controls and price controls, which was so positive. And you're already seeing the effects of more supply in the market for houses and apartments, and therefore a decrease in the price. But the problem with decreeing that is that, in theory, a future government could reverse it, whereas dollarization is practically impossible to reverse. So in the case of Ecuador, you had left-wing populist government from 2007 to 2017, and the strong man in charge, Rafael Correa, wanted to end dollarization, to de-dollarize, and he was never able to, because dollarization was far more popular than he was, even when he had 70% or so approval rating. And dollarization in Ecuador has had around 90% approval rating. So I think it's the most urgent measure, and I really hope that we can see it soon in Argentina.
So there's been a talk of fiscal dominance. That is to say, one of the problems is when the spending is driving monetary policy, in effect. And that's what's getting all of the attention. How do you address that? Is it possible to go back to use the current central bank and try to install some controls, or is that just no longer credible in Argentina?
Is that question for Agustin?
Well, Augustin.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree with Daniel that dollarization it was my favorite program from the beginning. And of course, it's a game changer. No? And I agree with 100% of all the things that he said. But of course, it's not a panacea. No, it's not something that you need to do to live with all the other structural reforms, and you need to tackle the fiscal deficit. But I think that President Milei is completely committed to that. The problem is that maybe he sees this monetary program as a transition program towards dollarization. The debate is if you need to have all the dollars in the central bank before dollarization or not. Because if you do, we don't have the dollars because we have negative reserves. But there are other people that, for instance, Emilio Campos, who is also in Libertad y Progreso, he developed a program to build it's a very complicated thing with trust, international trust, but the idea is to strengthen the central bank balance sheet. So he could take the dollars from abroad as debt and dollarize the economy. And then you have in the following years, you would be a reversal of all this trust because of it would be the balance sheet of the central bank would be stronger and stronger each day. So I believe that you have to deal with the real things. Now we are dealing with as mentioned Daniel also, with these lower interest rates that are around 100% against 250% of inflation, which is terrible for deposits. Deposits in pesos declined like 35% in real terms in only 70 days, which is very strong. But dollar deposits are growing very fast. So we have to deal with these things. But nonetheless, I think all the structural reforms, we have to got it in place.
So if you bring about dollarization, it means that people in Argentina will be transacting in US dollars. In effect, they'll be dealing with whatever the inflation rate is of the US dollar, rather than one that's domestically determined. So all transactions, does that mean government revenues, taxes would also be brought in dollars?
Yes, and also you have to know something that is very interesting. We Argentinians, we already have $100 billion in banknotes, and but they are underground in the underground economy. We say in the mattress, under the mattress. And if we dollarize the economy and we change some taxes that are taxing this kind of people, and we develop a pardon, because 40% of the economy is in underground economy, is informal. And so we are already dollarized. The problem is that it's a de facto dollarization, and we need a de jure dollarization. So it's going to change everything. I guess that very rapidly we could grow the monetary base, probably doubling the monetary base of Argentina, no? And probably doubling deposits in dollar terms in Argentina very fast. Something similar happened in Ecuador, but I think in Argentina we are the third country that have more dollars outside the United States. It's Russia, China, and Argentina.
Well, before we go to questions from our participants, my last visit to Argentina, I did notice that you could pay pesos or you could pay cash dollars, and people preferred cash dollars. And the blue
Exactly.
rate between there's the official peso to dollar rate, which you only had to pay for credit cards if you were dumb enough to pay with a credit card. And the blue rate was advertised everywhere, and that was the market rate between the two. How would you decide at what rate you would convert pesos or peso-denominated debt, assets, and so on into dollars? How do you figure that out?
That's also another. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, please go ahead, Arun.
No, please, Daniel, go.
Oh, no, I was going to say that one thing, and I mean, I'm not inventing this. Even former Finance Minister Domingo Cavallo has said this recently, who was in charge of the convertibility system, which also brought down inflation by fixing the exchange rate to the dollar in the 1990s. No one is going to believe the promise of dollarization while the exchange rate remains controlled. So the fact you have a blue dollar because there is an official exchange rate, and you need to liberate. And it's very important when you dollarize, you have to dollarize at the market exchange rate. And the only way to know what the market exchange rate is to have it liberalized. And right now, the blue dollar is the closest thing you have to the market exchange rate. So one option would be to liberate the exchange rate, and then and then you can dollarize. The other option is just to say, okay, we're going to dollarize, and you go at a slightly higher rate than the blue dollar rate, just to have a cushion. So I see those two options if there was the intention to dollarize now, for instance.
Very good. Well, go ahead, Augustin, very quickly.
No, I agree 100%.
Okay. Well, so before we take some of the questions from our audience, I just want to mention the work that Atlas Network does in collaborating with and supporting our partners in Argentina and 102 other countries around the world. It's great to work with organizations like Cato and with Libertad y Progreso to advance a common agenda of economic rationality, of sound money, of sound policy, and to make possible economic growth and prosperity and freedom for everyone. So we do that entirely with a private voluntary support, and $25 or more, you could click on the link, gets you Freedom's Champion magazine delivered regularly to your door. So let's turn to some of the questions that we have here. The first one, this is an interesting one. What are the benefits of Argentina tying itself to the policy decisions of the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank?
To whom?
Well, benefits to Argentina. So in
other
words,
I know, but I mean, you want me or Daniel?
You, Augustin.
I think when we mention dollarization, it's just to simplify it, because what we are going to do is to have a free monetary system, which you can operate in whatever currency you like. If, for instance, the dollar turns out to be in terrible shape in a few years, for instance, then we could choose another currency. We could operate in euros or in Bitcoin or whatever you like. But the idea is that when you have a free monetary decisions for the people, we Argentinians, we already decided we prefer dollars, mainly. Some of us are going to operate in euros or other currencies, but we are not tightening ourselves. And the other thing is, if it's interesting to have our own monetary policy. But the problem is that we started with this like 80 years ago. and we perform terribly, very poorly. Dollarization is not for any country, or it's not a good idea for every country, but it's a very good idea for countries such as Venezuela or Argentina, that we have not been able to have our own central bank. Imagine for that we have an excellent central bank with President Milei for 8 years, and we can manage to increase the reserves of the central bank in $15 billion the first 4 years, another $15 billion the second term, and then at some point another populist government is going to come, and if they see $100 billion in the central bank, they are going to take them for sure. And that's the difference with the dollarization, is that those dollars are going to be in the hands of the people, not the government. And that's I think it's the main decision, the most important thing for the decision.
Argentina certainly has had experience with that already, with confiscation of dollars held by the people. A question that I'd like to pose then for Candelaria, that one of our participants has raised. For the average person, it's difficult to understand all the nuances of diverse economic systems: dollarization, free economy, socialism, modern monetary theory, Austrian economics, and so on. What is being done by Milei or others, by you in particular, to educate normal, everyday people like us to be able to understand what's going on, what is the source of the problems, and what can be done to make life better?
Thank you for that question, because I think it's really important to make sure you understand what is the role of a think tank. Just to give you an example, I think, well, it's really, really important to the role of any think tank in any country, right? But just to give you an example, at Libertad y Progreso, we did this report explaining, showing the changes in the ranking of the Economic Freedom Index from Heritage Foundation if Milei achieve all the policy reforms he wants to achieve, and we would go from 144 to 50 or 55 in that ranking. So we did that report. We published it in all the media, in social media. We did a campaign, and it was really nice because the government took the report and start explaining their proposals with our work, So as a think tank, it's really important to have the research, have the analysis, but also to explain in a simple way to the public opinion all these things, because they need to understand why these policy reforms are going to improve their lives. So if a think tank achieve this, you can have like a change in the opinion and a support for that policy reform, or even more, you can create a momentum for a change. So education, it's part of the work think tanks do, and I think we have to do it every day better, professionally and seriously.
That's one of the key elements, is bad policies don't generally repeal themselves. You have to come in with the right policies that are clearly formulated so incentives are aligned correctly. They're in accordance with the legal system and the constitutional order, and then explain them to people so they understand what is going to happen. I know that Libertad y Progreso has been very active in explaining through clever videos that are interesting but deep. So Gloria Alvarez's work, I think Antonella Martí also have introduced these ideas to millions of people in common sense language that normal people can understand. So I'd like to then turn to this question about spending. So short-term, dollarization helps to get the house in order. Longer term, you still have this problem of overspending. How does dollarization impact runaway spending of government in Argentina? Daniel.
Well, the beauty, as I see it, of dollarization is that it completely separates fiscal policy from monetary policy. And by that, I mean that, as Agustin was saying correctly, dollarization doesn't solve all your problems. You can still have overspending, you can still have chronic deficits as they've had in Ecuador and El Salvador. But the thing with dollarization is that since governments and politicians can't monetize their deficits and their debts, then that doesn't affect the purchasing power of ordinary people. And that's why you can have situations where, for instance, El Salvador last year was having trouble, basically having a fiscal crisis, and they were having to borrow at rates above 15% in international bond markets. But still, if you're a solvent Salvadoran individual or business, you could get a mortgage at around 6 or 7%, a 20 or 30-year mortgage, which was unheard of before dollarization, and I think is unheard of in much of Latin America today. So I think, and just to answer, if I may just intervene regarding the last question, just because you dollarize doesn't mean you're fully dependent on the Federal Reserve. And as I said, there are different types of dollarization. In the case of Panama, they dollarized, but they also fully liberalized the banking system starting in the 1970s. And this has created situation where Panama's monetary policies is influenced mostly by internal factors, due to the ease with which banks can withdraw and invest in the monetary system of the country. So in that sense, Panama is affected by the Federal Reserve to the same extent that any other country is affected by the Federal Reserve. And you also have, for instance, during the last couple of years of inflation, you had Ecuador and Panama having lower inflation rates than the United States. So I think that's also important to keep in mind regarding dollarization.
Well, here's a question then from an entrepreneur who does business in Argentina, based abroad. He says, our company has 3 manufacturing sites in Argentina. Last year, we lost 20 million US dollars, mainly because we could buy US dollars to pay for imported raw materials, but you needed to wait 280 days after applying to purchase the currency. And in 80% of the cases, the answer was, there is no money. And it was impossible to operate. What's the way out of that problem that international businesses face in Argentina? Augustin.
Well, probably, yeah, I completely understand what he's saying because it was terrible. And President Milei, he's already deregulating the imports, for instance. So now it's easier, and he's trying. We already have a backlog of a lot of problems with the importers, and he developed a new bond for them of about $6 billion. But also the idea is that we have to get rid of these exchange rate controls, which are terrible. We have like many different exchange rates, and they are changing them every time. And so we see this as a transition program. And probably in the next quarter or 2 quarters, I'm quite positive that we are going to see a free exchange rate. And so everything is going to be much easier in Argentina. And of course, if we end up with dollarization, as Daniel said, everything is going to be much, much easier for foreign investors and also for local investors.
Very good. Well, as we're coming toward the end, I want to ask a question about how you feel about the future. So to all 3 of you, are you super optimistic, guardedly optimistic, uncertain, a little pessimistic? Where would you put yourself? Candelaria.
I'm optimistic. I saw so many things during the last 2 months that I didn't even think I was going to dream about it. And they are happening right now. They are like symbolic things, but they mean so much to this broken society, you know? So if we can change that, I think we can change anything. People are asking about things like, well, that budget or that trust, why is that? Why are we paying for this? Where that money comes from? So all those questions are amazing. I mean, it's incredible. So I'm optimistic. I still living here in Argentina, and I hope to stay here.
Super. Daniel, as a foreigner, how do you see it? You're muted.
Sorry. Right. Well, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, if you would have told me 5 years ago that in 5 years we will have a president of Argentina who is not only libertarian, but also describes himself as an anarcho-capitalist, I would have never believed you. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity, not only for Argentina, but for the whole of Latin America. And I'm very optimistic. Let's just hope we can get dollarization through sooner rather than later.
Augustin.
I'm very optimistic about Argentina, and I can tell you why. Because what Daniel said and Candelaria is that there is something beyond that. That there's the youth people in Argentina now, they are libertarian, most of them. And if President Milei got 56% of the votes within the youth, probably he got like 60% or more. And if you take male young people, he took like 80% of the votes. So that's very interesting because the future of Argentina is libertarian.
Well, those are remarkable statements, quite optimistic. I'm happy to hear it. The country of Borges, of literature, of one of the greatest bookshops in the world, of tremendous food and culture, may be able to turn the corner. And it's because of hard work. It didn't just fall out of the skies. And I know that our friends at Libertad Progreso have been working for so many years, so carefully explaining to people, making the case, being in the Congress, being with the experts on radio, television, and so on, to make changes happen, to be able to rescue your society. So I really salute you. And then turning back to our audience, I hope you'll be joining me in thanking our panelists for their invaluable insights. And also thank you for your engaging questions. I wish we'd been able to get to some more of them. This has been our very first Freedom Worldwide webinar. We're going to be hosting them every month, so be sure to join us March 28th, when we'll visit with expert guests and partners of Atlas Network from Taiwan to talk about the future of freedom in that country, which is currently facing a great deal of aggression from the Chinese Communist Party on the mainland. So when you leave today's webinar, you'll have a chance to complete our very short survey. Let us know what topics you'd like to see in future editions of Freedom Worldwide. And please let us know how Atlas Network can best equip you with the information you're looking for about freedom in the world today. I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you at the next webinar. So long and stay free. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this edition of Freedom Worldwide, please help us support this program and our partners by making a tax-deductible donation to Atlas Network. And with your gift of $25 or more, we'll deliver a printed subscription to our Freedom's Champion magazine, full of exclusive stories about the amazing people of the worldwide freedom movement. Just click the link to get your subscription today.